This is a child who goes to the kindergarten for the first time, and this is a highly sensitive child who goes to the kindergarten for the first time. They are both experiencing the exact same kindergarten at the exact same time. But do you know how they differ fundamentally? They have a completely opposite perception of the situation. While kindergarten seems to bring joy to the typically sensitive child, the highly sensitive child experiences the situation as threatening. For highly sensitive children, these situations, which are seemingly unproblematic from the outside, can leave traumatic wounds. This is why it's incredibly important to support highly sensitive children properly so that they can develop their full potential and become healthy and sensitive adults. Today, I will be talking with Jules De Vitto about how we can empower highly sensitive children, why boys and young men in particular struggle with their high sensitivity, and whether spirituality might even be the key to help children thrive in their lives. I was really surprised at several points by Jules' approaches and how she uses spirituality in her valuable work. Jules De Vitto has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, a Master of Arts in Education, and a Master of Science in Transpersonal Psychology, Consciousness, and Spirituality. She is an accredited and certified transpersonal coach as well as an experienced educator. Jules works on the Alef Trust Faculty as a part of the one-year certificate in Transpersonal Coaching Psychology. She's also the founder of the Highly Sensitive Human Academy, a central hub that offers courses, coaching, articles, and a podcast for highly sensitive people. She runs a highly sensitive children practitioner training for professionals who want to learn how to support highly sensitive children in a professional context. Jules is passionate about spreading awareness of high sensitivity and learning to embrace our gifts and purpose in life. So, thank you so much, Jules, for joining us today on the podcast. You're a transpersonal coach and counselor. And maybe you can define that in the beginning, what that actually is for our listeners. So transpersonal coaching psychology, the term itself.
Yeah, great question. So transpersonal is a term a lot of people haven't actually heard of. It's not well known. And it's based on the paradigm of transpersonal psychology. And transpersonal psychology is known as the fourth wave in psychology. And it's really a holistic and integrative way of working with people and understanding the world. So we tend to draw on the spiritual domain as well. So understanding that obviously we are an individual person with an ego, but there's also something that goes beyond that. So as a transpersonal coach, I'm working with people in a very holistic and integrative way and, working on all levels of their being and also helping them to integrate or understand spiritual experiences. So those experiences that are also non-ordinary or we can't always make sense of. So it's really about both working with people on all levels of their being and understanding that there is something beyond that, beyond the individual ego, and also this idea that we are on a psycho-spiritual journey throughout life. So we're going through this transformative journey. And so with that, I am really keen on helping people understand that often is a meaning and a purpose behind difficult experiences as well. So, for example, depression, rather than diagnosing it as an illness, I like to help people understand that there is meaning, often there's meaning and purpose behind the challenge.
Oh, that's
so that's
beautiful.
A brief summary, yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's a beautiful approach, definitely. Today, we want to talk about empowering highly sensitive children, especially, and the parents, as well as teachers, people who work with highly sensitive children. And I also want to connect the topic of spirituality in the podcast a bit with teaching children, because I think it's definitely an interesting approach, and I'm curious to hear how you connect your framework within spirituality. But Maybe to start with, you now worked as a coach and counselor with highly sensitive individuals for years. And I'm also curious to hear, especially, what is your experience with working with children who are highly sensitive? Because it's definitely, yeah, a sensitive child is definitely a fragile individual. And how do you approach these?
Yeah, absolutely. So now I mainly work with adults. So I mainly work with highly sensitive adults in my coaching and counseling practice. But for a long time, I worked in education, and I worked as a primary school teacher for over 10 years. So my main experience working with children is through teaching and working as a teacher. And what I experienced was, being a highly sensitive person myself, I was really noticing that it was showing up a lot in the classroom, in schools, in the education system. So statistics say that around 1 in 5 children are highly sensitive. So in a classroom of 30 people, that's of 30 children, that's about 5 children on average. And I really was seeing that in the classroom, and those children really struggle with overstimulation, overwhelm. As highly sensitive people, we tend to process very deeply. We're very sensitive to subtleties in the internal and external world. So these children would, struggle often with the school day, or struggle with the noise of the classroom, or even the sensory stimuli, so bright lights, a noisy playground, and also the pace of the day as well, the pace of lessons, needing more time to integrate and move between activities. So I became really curious as to how we can support these children, and also the fact that there still isn't much awareness about it. So I'm still really struck by the fact that a lot of professionals and parents don't know what it means to be highly sensitive, and so they're not able to identify it in their children. So often, a sensitive child might be diagnosed with a disorder, or they might be labeled as having something wrong with them, when this is not necessarily the case. It's just that they need supporting in different ways, and they need a particular environment to really thrive. And so I feel really passionate about providing this in the education system and other contexts too.
Yeah, beautiful. I just also talked about that with a friend a couple months ago, because it's and this friend also worked with highly sensitive children and with other children in specific. And we were also talking about the environmental factors, because I think this is one of the biggest challenges for a highly sensitive child, right? Who is born into this overstimulating world. But do you also think, as you worked in that context, that there is a lot of awareness missing for, let's say, the teachers for the caretakers, for the people who in the end teach children how to thrive in this world?
Absolutely. I definitely feel there's a lack of awareness and a lack of education in terms of what it means to be highly sensitive. So, the label, which was coined by Dr. Elaine Aron in the early 1990s, it's still in its early days of the research. It's still developing. There's still, especially I'm based in the UK, and I think there's even more awareness about high sensitivity in America or even Europe. But in the UK, it seems to be still really growing. And I will speak to a lot of teachers or parents who have never even heard of the term. So I believe this is really step number one, that we need to educate and bring awareness and start talking more about what it means to be highly sensitive.
Is that true that when you see those teachers, that they kind of work with every child or teach every child the same way? So we have like one framework for every child, whether where it is on the sensitive scale?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest issues in the education system. It is something that's evolving and changing over time, but there's still this idea that all children learn or process in the same way and need the same conditions to thrive, or lessons are often taught in a particular standardized way. And I think what we need to do is really embrace diversity and neurodiversity. So the fact that we do process information differently and we have different needs in terms of how we learn, different learning styles. And this is really important for highly sensitive children and also other children who might be diagnosed with things like ADHD or dyslexia or autism. I know we were recently talking about this topic as well. So I'm really keen on bringing awareness in terms of neurodiversity and the need to embrace differences in education and learning styles. It's interesting because I can reflect on my personal experience. And I remember as a child, I was very introverted. I was labeled shy. I very rarely spoke up in the classroom. And I remember in my later primary years and going into secondary school, the teachers thought I was really struggling. And I remember at that time we had graded lessons. So we were put into different tiers depending on our ability. And I was put into the lower sets. And the teachers thought I was really, really struggling. And what's interesting as a result of that, I remember going on to work really, really hard. I think I had a need to prove myself in some way. But now looking back, I realize I wasn't necessarily struggling. It wasn't that I wasn't understanding the work. It's just I had a particular way of learning and I needed to process the information that was offered in the lesson, take it away, reflect on it in my own way. And I'm a very visual learner. So I really thrive by images and creating visual spider diagrams, things like that to help me process. And then once I've done that, I'm ready to, share that integrated knowledge, but I wasn't able to do it always in the classroom straight away. So that's a good example of how, as a highly sensitive person, it wasn't that I wasn't understanding. It's just I had a particular need to have time to integrate that knowledge. I think if a teacher has that awareness, they can make accommodations and allow for those differences in the classroom.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing. I can also relate with that story a lot because I was in the same position as a child. And you said before that I picked that up, that you were talking about needs, especially in children. And I know, for example, Dr. Gabor Mate talks a lot about needs, also in the context of childhood trauma. And I want to know, what are specific needs, maybe you can also shed a light on, that highly sensitive children have that other children maybe do not have in that extent?
Great question. So, of course, every child is different. So I would really encourage anyone working with a highly sensitive child or children to really pay attention to that particular child, really observing and listening and attending to what that child is needing, what they're feeling, what they're communicating. But in general, a highly sensitive child is needing, as I just mentioned, more time to integrate information, to process information. And that's not because they're struggling to process, it's because they process so deeply. So there's a need for more time. I would say the sensory environment is really important. So considering the lighting in the room, considering noise levels, even the positioning of the child, material comfort. So we can be quite sensitive to clothing and labels in clothing. So Is the child comfortable in their skin? And also in terms of emotions, so the diversity of a sensitive child's emotions is more, the range is larger. So there's more diversity in terms of their emotional range. It's really about allowing the child to know that's okay and there's nothing wrong with that, and giving them space to allow those emotions to be acknowledged and expressed rather than suppressed or denied. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this, but this shows up a lot in highly sensitive boys. And it's really common, that they can have a lot of emotions, maybe tears, crying, and especially in boys, it's stigmatized and they're often told that's not okay, you need to man up, stop crying, get over it. So those kind of statements are really damaging to children, and especially to highly sensitive boys, because basically we're teaching them that it's not okay to have emotions and they need to be got rid of or suppressed, and that's not healthy for anyone. There needs to be a big shift there in terms of giving space to the depth of our emotional experience.
Yeah, I agree. It's also quite a personal topic for me as a man who grew up as a highly sensitive boy, and I observed that and still observe that as well in my environment, in the current social system. I feel like what was missing, especially for me when I was younger, is that kind of feeling also of a peer group who is also male and sensitive, because we were all in a kind of in a box where everyone is kind of equal. And I just had this feeling that we all had to act tough, like no matter how sensitive we were. So all the other sensitive boys also act like they were not sensitive. Right. So we all just had this feeling, well, we are somehow wrong, and we need to, especially as a boy, then act like we wouldn't feel emotions and act like we were tough and just show strong emotions.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this, but I think being a highly sensitive boy or a highly sensitive man doesn't mean suppressing the masculine traits or qualities as well. So, for example, anger, let's say that's more of a, or it's perceived as more of a masculine emotion, or it's more permitted. So it's okay to be angry as a man, right? Express your anger. Anger has a place, and if it's expressed in a healthy way, then it has a place. So it's not about getting rid of those qualities either, or, being resilient, being strong. Those qualities have a place, as well as the more emotional, crying or feeling sensitive, those softer qualities. So it's not about getting rid of one, it's about having place for all of those qualities. And I think that's really important to acknowledge.
What I took from my childhood growing up as a highly sensitive boy is especially not suppressing emotions like anger, but everything that in my perception was weak, I suppressed.
Right.
So there was, for example, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, some sadness, and I was suppressing these. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that is what is caused by that stigma for many highly sensitive boys. And as you said, when you grow up as a man, then at some point you realize, well, it's okay to have these kinds of emotions as well. And I think some anxiety many highly sensitive boys have is that they think that, for example, when they are sensitive, they will never, I don't know, get a girlfriend or get a job or will thrive in the world to be successful, because they do not have the ability to reach these goals because of their sensitivity. I think that is the point where the awareness has to rise, especially for the boys. And I'm also curious to, when we stick to that topic, like how is that on the other hand for girls then? Is it more easy for them as highly sensitive girls?
So I think as girls and women, there's less stigma attached to those softer qualities. But as you said, it's really important to share that those, I'm referring to them as softer qualities, but they're not a weakness. They're not fragility. So it doesn't mean being sensitive doesn't mean to be fragile, broken. It's not a weakness. And yeah, unfortunately, there's still a lot of stigma about that, whether you're male or female. But actually, I believe sensitivity is a strength. It relates to vulnerability too. And I love the work of Brené Brown, actually, who talks about shame and vulnerability and how being able to acknowledge and express those emotions is a strength, and it does bring about resilience in a person. I think for women and girls, sensitivity is more accepted. It's deemed as socially acceptable to cry or connect with your emotions. There's still some stigma there. And I think in particular, if you are highly sensitive and introverted, and I was just speaking to someone about this, how still, and in particular in the Western culture, it's more encouraged to be extroverted. So those qualities of speaking up, being outgoing, being confident, being the first one to step forward, they're really valued in our culture. But if you're more introverted, then sometimes it's frowned upon. And I really love the work of Susan Cain, who wrote the book Quiet, where she really validates and says it's okay to be introverted and to be quiet as well.
And there's a lot of stigma as well with introversion then, which is connected to high sensitivity, to shyness.
Absolutely. Although not every highly sensitive person is introverted. So it's believed that around 70% of HSPs are introverted as well. But you've got roughly 30% of HSPs who are extroverted. So yeah, just know it is possible to be extroverted and highly sensitive at the same time. But it's more likely that you're going to be introverted.
I definitely love the fact that you also go into the spiritual side of sensitivity. And I read a lot on your blog, and you spoke a lot of about it on your podcast as well. I'm pretty curious about, especially in the concept of your framework, how and when do you integrate spiritual elements into your framework, and also when working with children or also with highly sensitive people in general?
Yeah, so on one hand, it's fundamental to everything, all of the work I do. So it's there in every aspect. I may not always explicitly be referring to it or talking about it, but as I mentioned at the beginning, when I'm working with an individual or with a group, I'm always aware of the spiritual domain in the field collectively as well. So this awareness that there's always something more at play. So as an example, when I'm working one-to-one with someone, I'm very much aware of the liminal space, which is otherwise known as the space in between myself and that person. So, you know, what's going on in the collective field, and that might be being aware of subtle energies, imagery, other levels of reality as well. So that's something I'm constantly aware of and working with, even if explicitly I'm not talking about it. And then with an individual, if we're bringing it in a more explicit way, I think it's really important to state that spirituality isn't based on any particular domain, doctrine or religion, right? So I'm never inflicting any particular beliefs on anyone else. And that's especially important when working with children, because obviously it's important that they create their own particular belief system, or it might be based on their cultural upbringing or background as well. But what's important is giving space to those conversations. So I think that lacks a lot in education. We need to have more conversations about spirituality and giving space for children to figure out what their belief system is. But also I found that children are more sensitive to these other levels of reality, or accessing what's known as the collective unconscious as well. So when I've worked with children, I'm aware they tend to have very vivid dreams, or sometimes can have they can see things which we're not always able to see in ordinary consciousness. So yeah, I'm just curious about that. And I think, as I said, it's good to have conversations about these topics rather than pushing it aside and denying that it exists.
Yeah, I'm pretty interested in that because, as you said, you also create this awareness about the topic of spirituality. And I was thinking about it when I first stumbled across that topic of spirituality. I think I was 19, 20 years old. When do you start to introduce especially children to the topic of spirituality?
Yeah, so I believe we can introduce it from a young age. And for young children, that can be as simple as connecting with nature. So, going out into nature, connecting with the environment, with trees, with the elements, the awareness that we're part of something greater than the individual self, this awareness that the universe operates in cycles of life and death. And so those kind of concepts can be taught to children from a very young age. It's something that comes very naturally to us as humans. So again, it's not about introducing any particular doctrine. It's really just about knowing that we are connected to something greater, and often that something greater is something sacred. So for some children, some families, some cultures, we can talk about God. In other parts of the world, maybe that's not appropriate or not accessible. So we can talk about consciousness, we can talk about a universal field. There's so many words and labels we can give to this. But really it's about that connection.
Yeah, definitely. When you're saying that, I just sense that I think it would be pretty helpful, or would have been pretty helpful for me as a child, to have this kind of explanations or concepts, because for me, I think when I look back, a lot of the suffering came out of this unknown factors within myself, and I didn't have the term, for example, spirituality or consciousness, where I could have a relation with that makes it explainable and understandable for me in a way. So it was a lot of, well, what's going on? I have no idea. And so it might be really helpful to introduce it early on.
Absolutely. And I relate to that too, because I remember, and this is really common in highly sensitive children, that from a young age, we're asking these bigger questions about the meaning of the universe. So I remember from the age of 6, as early as I can remember, really asking and trying to make sense of the world that I was living in. So these more existential questions about meaning, purpose, why are we here? How do we make sense of this? So those are big questions to be asking at a young age. And I think for highly sensitive children who don't have space to explore those questions or talk about it or have a framework to make sense of it, it can be quite confusing and overwhelming. So as you're saying, just to have a space to talk about it and be supported through that questioning is so crucial, and feeling that you're not alone in that as well.
What I also was thinking is that, like, the practical question here, how can we actually, as a society, and I know, for example, also the school system has been criticized a lot, how can we find solutions that practically work? Because at the moment, what I see is that we still have this kind of concept. You take a group of, I don't know, depends on the city, 100 children, 500 children, you equally split them into, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 10 groups, and then you have class A, class B, class C. This is how it goes, right?
Right.
And it seems so wrong from a perspective, from so many perspectives. For example, as we talked about neurodiversity, high sensitivity, wouldn't it make more sense just theoretically to, or do you think that's a good approach, for example, to divide those groups into sensitivity, or just at least partly that you have, let's say, one group who is 50% highly sensitive, or that you have even a group who is 100% highly sensitive? Do they have to be treated differently? Do you think that's a good approach, or would you mix them up completely, for example?
Yeah, I think it's important not to separate or divide into groups or categories in that way. I'm more a fan of integration and working with diversity. So yeah, we don't need to separate or cater particularly to just one group, such as the highly sensitive children. Yeah, we don't want to separate them, because I think that can create more of a sense of, oh, I'm different, or there's something wrong with me. And I believe this with all different diagnoses as well. I don't think we should be separating or segregating out, but mixed together. As I said earlier, it's just about awareness of differences in the group. So as a group, that doesn't mean you're all the same. And so I also said this earlier, but when you're sitting with an individual, it's really about listening and meeting them where they are. So there are no set rules of how to work with an individual. Obviously, there are concepts and ideas that we can be aware of, but we really need to listen deeply to each individual child in the room. So yeah, I'm not a fan of segregation, but I think we can work with a mixed ability group.
Yeah, I was also seeing it more from the perspective of the teacher side, that you could maybe teach, or you are more present when you do not have to change your own mood all the time. So when you are in a group of sensitive children, of sensitive people, you definitely treat them in another way than you would in a non-sensitive group. But obviously it also is an unrealistic and maybe even a discriminating environment for the group itself. It's been around a bit more here, like what are the fundamental basis for people who work with highly sensitive children? Also, as I said, in a practical way, what can they do to address the specific needs when they are, for example, a teacher in the actual classroom?
Yeah, so there's some particular modalities that I talk about and I teach. So I actually offer an online training for professionals who want to learn how to work with highly sensitive children. And I've developed a particular framework that has different domains where we focus on these, resources and tools that we can apply into any professional context. So one of them is integrating mindfulness. So I found the technique of mindfulness is really helpful for highly sensitive children that can tend to become overwhelmed or struggle with anxiety, stress. So every day it might be as simple as taking 5 to 10 minutes to practice mindfulness. It could be mindful movement. Children like to move a lot, or working with the breath. So helping children to cultivate that practice to regulate the nervous system and emotional regulation is really powerful. I found I'm a big fan of something called nonviolent communication. And this is a tool to work with communication. And I've taught this a lot to children, and I find it's so, incredibly helpful as an adult trying to communicate with a highly sensitive child, but also for the child to learn that their feelings and their needs are valid and they can find a way to express those. So this is really good for highly sensitive children because they tend to struggle with articulating or expressing their voice and finding words for things. So that's a really powerful tool. And then, yeah, working a lot with the child's confidence, self-esteem, and beliefs as well. So as we've spoken about, children unfortunately can adopt these beliefs from an early age that it's not okay to cry, or there's something wrong with them, or they're fragile, or they need to toughen up, things like that. So I think it's good to work with those beliefs and reframe them and help to empower highly sensitive children to have a stronger sense of self and identity. And another great tool I think is really helpful with children is cultivating self-compassion and self-care. So we need this as adults, but I think if we can start to help children from a young age to develop this really kind, compassionate inner voice, inner dialogue, learning to self-soothe when they're feeling overstimulated or overwhelmed, and attending to what they need. So to have that awareness from an early age is only going to empower that person later in life to really attend to their needs. So those are just some of the tools. I could share more, but there's so many different areas to work with.
Yeah, beautiful. You talked about nonviolent communication. I think I remember correctly. Isn't the author Rosenberg? Because
it's Marshall Rosenberg.
Marshall Rosenberg. Because I also I listened to the audiobook, and it was one of the best books which I actually read or listened to, but it's probably because I'm highly sensitive. What I really thought is beautiful is how he comes up with forms of articulation, how to put out your needs, how to put out wishes, and to form sentences with a lot of compassion. And I found it to be super helpful to just have a couple soft skills in communication. And it's so simple what he comes up with, but so effective on the other hand, because for me it was quite eye-opening to also find self-compassion, to not just use these strategies when communicating with others, but also when communicating with myself.
Right.
Do you think that's also a good way for parents who raise children who think they are highly sensitive in the end? Do you think that's the good way to teach children also to communicate early on?
Yes, definitely. I think it's really a great tool for any parent to use with any child, actually, but especially a highly sensitive child. And in that way, you're also modeling it to the children. So I find if you're using it as a parent or as an adult, then you're modeling that way of communicating, and the children will eventually pick it up as well. And so, to do it as a parent is crucial. And I know it's not always easy. I know the reality of working or being a parent is not easy. And so we can't expect to be perfect or perfect the skill and do it right all of the time. But I think the intention to communicate in this way is really powerful. And really, nonviolent communication, as you said, it's quite a simple tool, really. It can become more in-depth. There's a lot of depth to it, but you're really working with I statements. So you're owning your feelings, your needs, and you're stating facts and making requests rather than blaming or shaming or placing demands on someone else. And highly sensitive children don't respond well to blaming, shaming, or feeling that they're having a lot of demands placed on them. So this communication style works really well with those of us who are sensitive.
One thing which always comes up when I think about a lot of compassion, or with a lot of compassion about nonviolent communication, is, as you said, sometimes harsh reality comes, and you also have to set clear boundaries, and you have to also communicate sometimes in a really strict and probably also a bit more let's say, angry way. But how would you combine these two concepts of setting strict boundaries and lines with compassionate communication?
Yeah, good question. And I think it's important to highlight that boundaries are often the most compassionate act when working with children and highly sensitive children. So we can sometimes feel wary of setting boundaries. We think we're being too harsh or, strict, or we confuse it with aggression. Actually, setting a boundary doesn't mean being aggressive or being violent. It's the opposite. So it is possible, more than possible, to set healthy boundaries in a compassionate way. Often, using something like nonviolent communication, that is setting a boundary. It doesn't mean that we need to shout, raise our voices, or be angry, but we can channel that energy in an assertive communication, and that's really powerful. And I found that the children will respond better when you're being compassionately assertive. There's actually a phrase, it's called fierce compassion. Kristen Neff coined this term, fierce compassion. Often we don't put the two together, but that would be an example. Fierce compassion would be setting an assertive, healthy boundary. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I never thought about that compassion is also similar to setting boundaries. I never saw it from that perspective, because I think, to me, and what I also saw from or experienced from other highly sensitive people, is that they often kind of misunderstand setting a clear boundary, even with compassion, with some kind of aggression, because now there is a distance in between, and the sense of, well, okay, someone sets a boundary. Do you think that's a thing, especially highly sensitive children often misunderstand, or isn't that really the case and it's just my perception?
Yeah, well, I think even a lot of adults confuse what you're talking about, putting the two together, but actually they are separate things. So a boundary isn't synonymous with aggression or anger or violence. We do need to separate the two. So again, we need to model that to children. How do we set healthy boundaries without aggression? And so I wanted to mention too that highly sensitive children appreciate boundaries because it helps them to feel safe. So you might be able to relate to this from your personal experience, but when an adult, so when you were a child, if an adult wasn't setting boundaries, you can feel unsafe. You might feel confused. You don't know where you stand. You don't know what is okay and what isn't okay. But a boundary is a container. So as a child, if an adult or a professional is being quite boundaried, and again, you can do that without ever having to raise your voice or be aggressive, the child knows where they stand. And so I'm a big believer in boundaries that don't have to be aggressive or violent or even raising your voice.
Yeah, interesting. Definitely. I think really helpful input. All right. So before we get to some quick final questions, is there anything you want to now share and summarize after all these beautiful insights you gave to us?
Yeah, so I think it's just really important, if I were to summarize what we've been talking about today, the number one thing is to bring more awareness to this topic. And I'm really passionate about wanting to bring that awareness and educate more professionals and parents on this topic. And there's so many resources online now. And there is also an assessment you can take, both as a parent or an adult for a child, to gauge whether they're sensitive or not. But also there's an assessment you can give to children for them to gauge whether they might be sensitive or not, or where they are on the spectrum. So just to remember, it's not a diagnosis. We're not diagnosing. but just to bring that awareness and start to consider ways that you can accommodate the environment or the way you're communicating or being with that child to help them feel, as we're talking about, safe and empowered, and knowing that there's nothing wrong with them, but actually they have a lot of gifts and potential and beauty to share with the world as well.
Amazing. Okay, then I have 2 quick questions for you now. What I'm curious about as well is, what does spirituality mean to you?
Wow, that's a big question. Yeah, so spirituality for me is really what I've spoken to, which is the sense of knowing and having the awareness that we are connected to something greater, and that something greater is something sacred. And I believe that we are all part of something whole, and our journey in life is really about working towards that sense of wholeness in ourselves and helping others to do that too. And it's a continuous journey of healing, of transformation. And ultimately it's about the evolution of consciousness too, and striving to be more compassionate and compassionate, ethical beings, right? So that's really how I would summarize it, as simply as possible.
Thank you. And last question, I really love this question. Is there anything about you, maybe also as a highly sensitive people, that people would not expect? If you want to share that.
Wow. The first thing that pops to mind is, it's often shared in the highly sensitive communities that we are sensitive to stimulants and to foods. And something people are always surprised by with me is that I love to drink coffee. And they always think, wow, is that not too much for you as a sensitive person? Don't you find it overwhelming or overstimulating? And I always, to this day, I have no intention to stop drinking coffee. And also the other thing is I love to travel. I love, so again, there's often a stigma that as a HSP, we want to feel safe and we don't like change, but I have traveled and moved a lot in my life, and I love exploring new countries and cultures, and I've lived all over the world. I lived in Asia for over 10 years. And so, that often surprises people because I am introverted too, but I love to explore and connect with people.
Is that some kind of high sensation seeking trait as well within you?
Possibly, yeah. So I do resonate with the high sensation seeking, even though I don't like roller coasters, or I would never do a skydive or anything like
me
that.
Neither.
But but traveling, exploring, that lights me up.
Thank you. So where can people find all of your work online? I will definitely link all the websites and resources in the description. But
thank you. So you can check out my website. It is highlysensitivehumans.com, or the Academy. The Academy is academy.highlysensitivehumans. That's where all of my courses are listed. And of course, I also have a podcast, Highly Sensitive Humans, and you can find me on Instagram and all of the main social media platforms.
Yeah, where we also did an interview, and I think this one will come out first. So yours on your podcast.
Yes, looking forward to sharing that.
Yeah, we will talk about neurodivergence. So, Jules, thanks a lot for coming around. And
thank you.
Thank you for all the beautiful input and insights. Yeah, as I said, I will link all the resources in the description, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode with Jules De Vitto. If you want to get in touch with her or want to have a look into her courses, into her programs and coaching, definitely check out the links under today's episode. All the resources, everything we talked about, you also find as well linked under today's episode. I see you in the next episode. Have a great day.